It's 12:33 p.m. Friday, November 19th, 2021. Congratulations to Mr. Rittenhouse for his acquittal on all charges. Well earned acquittal. His defense is pretty lame, but the prosecution didn't have much of a case. The law was on his side. He could have probably gotten a bench trial and also been acquitted. Now we find out if people will be bussed in from outside of Kenosha to have their protesting in Kenosha for this verdict about a Kenoshan defending himself from non-Kenoshans and a few Kenoshans. But the whole idea of outsider versus whatever is out the window, except that we know that people come from far outside to riot. But the problem is, now, anyone who wants to defend themselves in the riot kind of has a precedent now, don't they? The other thing is, it may not happen. It's kind of cold out. The fact is, the people that do that activity are lazy. Lazy people don't like it when it's cold. So, it's going to be frosty out. It's going to be chilly. Yeah, a few people might come down during the daylight, and as soon as the sun goes down, I doubt there will be any Molotovs or anything else serious. It's just not summertime anymore. Can't take your shirt off and put it over your face and try to grab somebody's gun because it's too cold. Your nipples will be so hard you won't be able to walk. So, yeah. All of our right, and I'm not talking legal right, I'm not talking civil right, I'm talking natural right, a quote-unquote God-given right to self-defense was what was at stake. The reason it was at stake was a political prosecution, almost a persecution, and no reason the case should have ever been brought. The evidence was very clear. I believe the reason that there was a holdout seemed to be something to do with somebody who was still ingrained into the propaganda that had been, there was so much misinformation about that case. You would not believe, maybe you would, how many people you can talk to, and each person has a different thing that they've heard about what actually happened. By confusing people with propaganda, it is possible to do that, to have a whole spread of different lies, and people get so confused about all the lies that everybody just picks one. You got 16 different apparent realities. And then after that, you start talking about things like how the subjective view of reality, the individual take on each one of those 16, is more important and more real than the objective reality, which is any aspects of real that is shared by all 16 individuals. So, subjective reality is important, but it is not the be-all, end-all, unless you are a solipsist. And just because you believe that you are all that exists does not mean that you are all that exists. So really, solipsism is the fundamental absence of self-awareness, because self-awareness is the understanding of your own impact on the environment around you, the fact that other people exist and have the same. At what point will it become acceptable on this platform to state a fair and obvious fact, a truth? The kid did nothing wrong. In fact, the kid did everything right. Reaction time, points of aim. Anyone in that situation could not wish, could not beg, could not do anything to gain a better reaction than that. If you were defending yourself and you came out of it alive, you didn't even have to kill every attacker. Should have never gone to court. There's so much footage of it, it's obvious. And then the prosecution, the state's attorneys, violated his constitutional rights. They failed to follow through on legal searches for other people involved in this, using a flimsy excuse of a recent victim law that pertains to sexual offense victims in court. that their personal history does not get dragged out. That, if a girl says she was raped, maybe she was, and she accuses a guy of it, and they want to go investigate, that the defense attorneys don't have the ability to get her as the victim's personal information from a phone and just put it out on the internet. Try and smear the character of the victim. That's what that law is for. They call it Marsy's Law. And the cops use this as an excuse to not search the phone of a living, complaining witness, the guy whose arm got blown up but survived. They had a warrant for his phone. He said no. They chose not to execute the warrant, citing that law. Then, when they received new evidence, they almost instantly, within 20 minutes of receiving the file, created a super low-res version which would eventually be forwarded to the defense as their copy of the same data, which is illegal. Think about that. The state is not tasked with conviction. The state is tasked with justice. That if laws were broken, we must press charges. If there's a defense to it, then let there be a defense to it. That's how it's supposed to be. And there was enough evidence of the events of that night to show that that was not a first-degree murder. There was no intent to kill. There was no premeditation. Should have never gone to trial. And they had a stipulation at the outset to accept any evidence as legit. And unfortunately, what that meant was there was no argument, no examination, no expert testimony regarding the validity of any of that evidence. Now, if you go take a look at my partial lunar eclipse video, like 2 videos ago, you'll see there's a white circle on the screen that through color, or through brightness and contrast and zooming, it is blown way up from the little tiny thing that it is in the sky in an attempt to catch the darkening of one side, not to get the face visible, because that wouldn't be possible. That yellowish white circle in the middle of the screen is not a picture of the moon. It is pixels on a screen that have been received by the camera, that have been brightened and enhanced, which is to say in the case of a zoom that there's interpolation, and it's all the same thing. Now, if I was to say, here, you enter this into the record of evidence as a photo of the moon, they'd say, how do we know that's really the moon? Now, in this case, yeah, it's blurry, but you could even get it to be clear, a clear image of the face of the moon, and still say, okay, but that's not necessarily, you could say this is a picture of the moon, this is not the moon. That's like the, was that Cene una pipe? This is not a pipe, your picture of a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe. It's not a pipe, right? What you're looking at on the screen is not me. It's an image of me, right? Okay. In the creation of the image, if the file is taken directly from the device on which it was captured without any processing, it can be used as evidence. If it is not, it really can't, because you have added pixels, added color. In the case of the, when they talk about AI upscaling and AI enhancement, what's happening there is that there is a program that is an artificial intelligence learning apparatus somewhere at its origin that's been copied off, and it has been trained by showing it a ton of images and saying, okay, we're going to try and zoom, we're going to see if you can get this right. And then they tell it when it's right, tell it when it's wrong, and it only tries to do the right thing, so where it can zoom correctly. And what'll happen is that you'll take 4 pixels, you'll pull it up to 48 pixels, and then it will enhance things into it that will realistically fit, But the problem is that if it's trained on specific imagery, it's going to use the specific imagery as its basis. What that means is if it's trained on action films, as the panel of lawyers had suggested on Rekieta, it's possible that it would automatically have an idea of, okay, that's a person holding a gun. Well, most of the pictures in action flicks of people holding guns are up. In this little 6 pixels that they turned into 48 or whatever, who knows? Who knows? So no, that should not be admitted. And then it turned out there was an even higher resolution version of that the prosecution did not provide to the defense, which is against the law, which is unconstitutional. So imagine if you got attacked and you defended yourself and you come up on trial with a prosecutor who seems like he's trying to go for his career and seems to think that you're his ideological enemy personified and wants to go after you as you know, a token martyr, as the sacrifice to the effigy for all the others. And imagine that he and his cohort cheat their way through the trial. And the judge goes, well, I don't really know what you're talking about, but I know you're doing something wrong, but we'll see. At least the jury was smart enough to know. And if the jury hadn't have been, the judge did in fact have the option, as he stated openly, of JNOV, judgment notwithstanding a verdict. So if they came back 15 minutes after and said, guilty on all counts, can we please leave? The judge would be like, sir, you're free to go. But this is one of those things that also a lot of people that didn't know anything about it until they started actually watching it and they started actually looking at the stuff in the trial. Most folks think that kid killed black people. He did not. He killed white people. And not only did he kill white people, every single person who took one of his bullets and one person who apparently dodged a bullet, that jump kick man, the prosecution knew who he was. They lied. They lied in their filings, saying that they didn't know who he was. They chose not to put him on the stand. The 2 other witnesses, the guy with the gun that shot over top of everyone's head right before the thing started with Rosenbaum, he and his wife were charged with arson by that same crooked prosecutor just so that they would not be available to testify in Rittenhouse's case. Because their testimony also would not have been good for the state. You see how bad that case was for the state to even present. Why did that go to trial? That's a political prosecution, a persecution. For what? Why? Think about that. So 2 victories today. 2. Number 1, the right of self-defense is upheld. And number 2, a jury said bullshit to a crooked political prosecution. But when it comes to the lawyer's misconduct, the borderline, if not outright, malpractice by the defense, those 12 people are the only reason that kid's walking home free. When it was obvious self-defense the whole time. Rosenbaum was a kid diddler. He had a thing for little boys. He had a restraining order against him from his girlfriend, which is why he couldn't stay with her when he got out of wherever it was that he got out of, be it jail or hospital. Huber was just about 18, or was 18, had just turned or something like, I think. Not that old, young adult, still lived with his parents, troubled youth, held knives to his siblings' throats, stuck them in the ears and went like this with a knife, cut the face, threatened his grandmother, threatened his sister, threatened his everybody. That's the skateboard dude. He had a rap sheet a mile long. Jump kick man, career criminal. These people would have been in jail if not for the release of certain prisoners for humanitarian reasons during the lockdowns, that it would not be fair to keep them in the jails. So those people were released just before the Summer of Love of riots for the COVID that we now know they knew all about also. That's a whole other story. You see how some people might think that there's something intentional going on. in the public sphere, in the culture and society. The guy that got shot in the arm traveled twice as far to get there than Kyle did. He came armed and claimed to be a medic as well. At no point did Kyle point his gun directly at anyone's head unless he was in the middle of a burst of fire while being attacked. Meanwhile, Grosskreutz faked and then lunged and got shot. Perjured himself. And then he went on to Good Morning America and Anderson Cooper, dude, to talk about this. And he's still trying to either... he can't get money out of the city for it at this point. It's a not guilty verdict, and his filing for $10 million in a civil suit against the city omitted the fact that he was armed at the time. On top of that, he also had other charges that were pending that the same assistant DA who led the prosecution against Rittenhouse cut him deals on in order to testify. Now that the not guilty verdict has come through on all counts, his friend Dominic, Kyle's friend, as well as Dominic's stepdad, may or may not face some sort of liability, possibly civil. But because the gun charge was thrown out, the minor in possession of a dangerous weapon, as it were, because that only pertains to weapons other than long-barreled rifles and shotguns wielded by anyone under 18. And specifically, if you are 16 or above, the long-barreled rifles and shotguns can be open carried. So the charge was dropped. As such, I would expect that the purchase of that firearm, even if they knew what he was going to use it for or whatever, at this point, couldn't be prosecuted. But those people also had deals worked out. All the prosecution's witnesses were people that had charges against them that the prosecution worked them deals in exchange for testifying. Then there's the witness they called Photo Chad for the defense. A gentleman with excellent memory and great photographic skills as well. And his testimony, under cross-examination by the prosecution, was that they attempted to suborn perjury with him. Crooked. And when called out for lying, for breaking the law, for anything, the response from the state's attorneys came in the form of narcissistic injury, which is to say, you could say he's lying, he's cheating, and he smells funny. And they'd say, I do not smell funny. I am affronted by the fact, and they make the whole thing about that one, right? You could call him fat, because one of them was. And he could then say, how dare you call me that, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, you didn't address the other two, though, right? The one time they just said they're lying, they're cheating, the guy comes back and says, how dare you impugn my integrity? And he went on, this was in the rebuttal to the close, and rather than address the facts of the case, Subway, Sauerkraus, Fatlock, the second in command of the thing, gets up and complains about being insulted by the other side during the rebuttal to the close. So, I believe justice was served. I don't think it's over. I don't think there are going to be monstrous riots, and if there are, you're going to have a lot more emboldened, armed locals, as it should be. But the reality is, most of the people that were there to loot and burn and protest were not from there. They could not have afforded to go there if they weren't paid to go there. And it's too cold. They are lazy. If they're not being paid, they're definitely not going to go. And if it's cold, they're probably definitely not going to go. So for me, much like with watching the Chauvin trial, now it's like, okay, what else is my life supposed to be about now? I've got to go to work tonight. I'm very excited for this. I'm going to listen to music and go about my night and whatever. And it's just a thing now that has finally got past a waiting, a very long waiting. I guess I'm going to start following a little bit of the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial, the murder of him. I don't even know the guy's names. Everybody knows the victim's name. Supposedly, there's some pretty interesting details in that one and some things that the media was playing with as well. We're just basically every single one of these high-profile trials comes out, and you find out that the media lied the entire time. They did everything they could to keep people divided and fighting, rather than provide information with an unbiased, journalistic perspective or whatever, which is what they're supposed to do. So, this will get uploaded while I'm driving tonight. Everybody have a good night, and I don't know, man. Justice is a tenuous thing, is it not?